My son has been eating more than usual. First I thought it was puberty, but now I think it's cannibalism. I knew it had gotten worse when I found the teeth marks on the raw steak in the fridge. Human teeth marks, small and deliberate, carved into meat that should have been cooked. My 15-year-old son Liam had bitten into it like an apple and put it back. The indentations matched his dental records perfectly, the slightly crooked canine on the left side leaving its signature. I stood there in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, holding that violated piece of beef under the fluorescent light, and felt my stomach turn over. This wasn't normal teenage behavior. This wasn't a growth spurt or some weird dietary experiment. The meat was cold, straight from the refrigerator, and the bite marks were fresh enough that saliva still glistened along the edges. I wrapped it in paper towels and threw it in the trash, then immediately pulled it back out and put it in a plastic bag. Evidence. Of what? I didn't know yet. But some instinct told me I'd need proof of this moment later. Being a single father to a teenage boy was hard enough without mysteries like this. Liam's mother died when he was 8, a car accident that happened so fast I didn't get to say goodbye. For 7 years it had been just us, navigating grief and adolescence together in our small house on Maple Street. I worked as an accountant from home, which meant I was always available when Liam needed me. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our Thursday night pizza tradition. He was a good kid, quiet and studious, the type who preferred reading sci-fi novels to playing sports. His teachers loved him. His few close friends were polite when they came over. Nothing in his life suggested he'd start eating raw meat in secret at night. But the evidence was there in my hand, wrapped in plastic, impossible to deny. I shoved it to the back of the freezer behind frozen vegetables and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. The next morning, Liam came downstairs for breakfast looking perfectly normal. Same shaggy brown hair that needed cutting, same slight frame that hadn't quite filled out yet, same shy smile when I asked how he slept. He poured himself a huge bowl of cereal and added what looked like half a gallon of milk. I watched him eat 3 bowls in rapid succession, barely chewing, shoveling spoonfuls into his mouth with mechanical efficiency. When I mentioned he seemed extra hungry, he shrugged and said he'd been working out more, trying to bulk up for track season. It was a reasonable explanation. Teenage boys did that. But his eyes didn't quite meet mine when he said it, and his hand trembled slightly as he lifted the spoon. After he left for school, I went to his room. I'd always respected his privacy, never snooped without reason, but raw meat with bite marks constituted reason enough. His room was cleaner than usual, which itself felt wrong. Liam was naturally messy, leaving clothes on the floor and books scattered across his desk. Now everything was organized with an almost obsessive precision. I started with his closet, pushing aside hanging shirts and checking pockets. Nothing unusual. His desk drawers held the normal teenage detritus, old assignments and broken pencils and charging cables. Under his bed I found his laptop, which I knew was wrong because he took it to school every day. I opened it, and the screen lit up without requiring a password. Another red flag since Liam was usually paranoid about his privacy. The browser history had been cleared recently, but when I checked his downloads folder I found dozens of PDFs. Medical articles about rare eating disorders, forum posts about unusual dietary cravings, scientific papers on something called pica. One document was titled, Prader-Willi Syndrome and Compulsive Eating Behaviors. I skimmed through it, my chest tightening with each paragraph. The syndrome caused insatiable hunger, but nothing in the literature mentioned raw meat or the kind of feral behavior I'd witnessed. Liam was researching his own symptoms, trying to self-diagnose whatever was happening to him. The fact that he hadn't come to me hurt worse than the mystery itself. The refrigerator became a battleground over the next 2 weeks. I'd stock it with normal groceries, and within days, everything would be gone. Not just the meat, though that disappeared fastest, but cheese, lunch meat, even the eggs I'd bought for weekend breakfast. I started marking the food with tape and dates, trying to track consumption patterns. A pound of ground beef vanished overnight, an entire package of chicken breasts gone in 24 hours. I confronted Liam about it gently, asking if he was feeling okay, if maybe we should see a doctor about his appetite. He got defensive immediately, snapping that he was fine and I was being paranoid. His voice cracked with puberty and anger, and he stormed up to his room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the hinges. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to him pace above me, back and forth, like a caged animal measuring its cell. That night, I heard him leave his room around midnight, his footsteps creaking down the hallway past my bedroom door. I waited 5 minutes before following him downstairs. The kitchen light was off, but the refrigerator door hung open, casting a cold glow across the tile floor. Liam stood in that light, his back to me, and the sound he made stopped me cold. A wet, tearing noise, followed by aggressive chewing. I flipped on the overhead light and he spun around, a package of raw hamburger clutched in both hands, meat smeared across his mouth and chin. We stared at each other for a long moment. His eyes were wide, caught, but also defiant. The hamburger package was torn open, and maybe a third of the meat was already gone, consumed raw and cold. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What do you say when you catch your son eating like a wild animal? Liam's jaw clenched and unclenched, bits of raw beef visible between his teeth. Then he dropped the package on the counter and ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. I heard his bedroom door slam and lock. The hamburger sat there, leaking pink juice onto the counter, accusatory evidence of something I still couldn't name. Sleep became impossible after that. I lay in bed listening for sounds from Liam's room, any indication of what he was doing in there. Around 3 in the morning, I heard his door creak open again. His footsteps were heavier than usual, more deliberate. I waited until he reached the bottom of the stairs before getting up and following. This time, he wasn't heading to the kitchen. He was going to the garage. I pressed myself against the wall in the hallway and watched through the darkness as he slipped through the door that led to the attached garage. The light clicked on, and I heard him moving things around, the scrape of boxes being pushed aside, the metallic clang of tools. I crept closer and peered through the crack in the door. Liam was kneeling in the corner behind my workbench, pulling something out of a cardboard box, a plastic-wrapped bundle that looked like it came from a butcher shop. He tore the plastic with his teeth, exposing dark red meat that definitely wasn't from our refrigerator. Where had he gotten it? How long had he been hiding food out here? I pushed the door open and he jerked around, the meat dropping from his hands. His face in that moment wasn't my son. The expression was feral, protective of his cache like an animal guarding its kill. For several seconds, we just stared at each other across the garage, father and son separated by more than physical distance. Then his face crumpled and tears started streaming down his cheeks. He looked 15 again, just a scared kid, and he whispered, "Dad, I can't stop. I don't know what's wrong with me." I crossed the garage and pulled him into a hug, ignoring the smell of raw meat and the way his whole body was shaking. He sobbed into my shoulder, great heaving cries that sounded like they were being ripped out of him. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red and desperate. He told me he'd been like this for 3 months now. It started small with just wanting meat more than usual, then progressing to needing it raw, then hiding stashes because he couldn't control the urges. He said it felt like his body was demanding something his mind couldn't understand. The next morning, I called his pediatrician and demanded an emergency appointment. Dr. Foster had known Liam since he was a baby, and I trusted her judgment more than anyone's. We sat in her office that afternoon while she reviewed Liam's symptoms, asking detailed questions about his eating habits, his mood changes, any physical abnormalities he'd noticed. Liam answered honestly, his voice small and ashamed as he described the compulsion to eat raw meat, the way cooked food didn't satisfy the craving anymore. Dr. Foster's expression grew more serious with each answer. She ordered a comprehensive blood panel, checking for everything from anemia to rare metabolic disorders. The results would take a week. In the meantime, she prescribed iron supplements and suggested we see a therapist who specialized in eating disorders. She was kind, but clearly concerned, and I saw her make a note in Liam's file that made my stomach drop. Possible pica with protein fixation. Recommend psychiatric evaluation if symptoms persist. Therapy started 3 days later with Dr. Adrian Okoye, a soft-spoken psychologist who worked out of an office downtown. Liam was resistant at first, slumping in his chair and giving one-word answers to Dr. Okoye's gentle questions. But something about the doctor's calm demeanor eventually broke through his defenses. By the 3rd session, Liam was talking more freely about the compulsion, describing it as a voice in his head that demanded meat constantly. He said cooked meat tasted wrong now, like cardboard, but raw meat sang to him with flavor he couldn't describe. Dr. Okoye listened without judgment, taking notes in a leather-bound journal. At the end of that session, he asked to speak with me privately. In his office, surrounded by degrees and certifications, he told me he was concerned this went beyond typical eating disorders. The specificity of Liam's cravings, combined with his inability to control them, suggested something neurological or possibly autoimmune. He recommended we see a specialist at the university hospital. The blood work came back abnormal. Dr. Foster called me at work, her voice tight with controlled alarm as she explained that Liam's iron levels were through the roof, far beyond what supplements could cause. His red blood cell count was elevated to dangerous levels, and several metabolic markers indicated his body was processing protein in ways that shouldn't be possible. She'd already made a referral to Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a hematologist at University Medical Center who specialized in rare blood disorders. The appointment was in 2 days. I thanked her and hung up, then sat at my desk staring at nothing while my mind raced through possibilities. Cancer, leukemia, some kind of genetic mutation that was just now expressing itself. Each option was worse than the last. When Liam came home from school, I told him about the abnormal results and the specialist appointment. He took the news with an eerie calm, nodding slowly like he'd been expecting this. That night, he ate an entire rotisserie chicken by himself, bones and all. I watched him crunch through the skeletal structure like it was nothing. Dr. Tanaka's office at the university was all glass and steel, modern and cold. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as she examined Liam. She reviewed his blood work with the kind of intense focus that made me nervous. After the physical exam, she ordered more tests. MRI of his brain and spine, full-body CT scan, bone marrow biopsy. The list went on and on, each test more invasive than the last. Liam took it all without complaint, lying still in the massive imaging machines while they mapped his insides. The bone marrow biopsy made him cry, not from pain, but from fear of what they'd find. I held his hand through the procedure, squeezing back when his grip became painful. Dr. Tanaka's face remained professionally neutral throughout everything, giving nothing away. She said she'd have preliminary results in 3 days, but the full panel would take 2 weeks. The waiting began to crush me. Every moment Liam wasn't eating felt like a victory, and every meal he consumed felt like watching him slip further away. His behavior at school started deteriorating. His English teacher called to report that Liam had fallen asleep in class multiple times, and when she tried to wake him, he'd snapped at her with uncharacteristic aggression. His best friend Caleb stopped coming over, and when I asked why, Liam muttered something about Caleb being scared of him now. The isolation was making everything worse. Liam spent more time in his room, and the sounds I heard through his door concerned me, pacing, muttering to himself, occasionally a low growl that didn't sound human. One night I heard a crash and rushed in to find he'd punched a hole through his closet door. His knuckles were bleeding, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at his hand like it belonged to someone else, flexing his fingers experimentally. The hole in the door was edged with splintered wood, and the force required to make it would have broken a normal person's hand. Liam's knuckles were bruised, but the bones seemed intact. Dr. Tanaka called on a Friday afternoon with preliminary results. Her voice was different this time, excited, but trying to stay professional. She'd found something in his blood work, something she'd never seen before. An unknown protein marker that didn't match anything in medical literature. His DNA showed minor mutations in several genes related to muscle development and sensory processing. She wanted to bring in colleagues from the genetics department, maybe write a paper about Liam's case. But first, she needed to run more tests to understand what this mutation was doing to his body. I asked if it was dangerous, if my son was dying. There was a long pause before she answered. She said honestly she didn't know. This was completely outside her experience. The mutation seemed stable, not degenerative, but she couldn't predict how it might progress. Liam needed to be monitored closely. I agreed to everything she suggested because what else could I do? My son was becoming something medicine couldn't explain. The next phase of symptoms arrived without warning. Liam's sense of smell became incredibly acute. He could identify what I was cooking from his room upstairs before I'd even turned on the stove. He complained that normal smells were overwhelming, covering his nose when we passed perfume counters or restaurants. But raw meat called to him from impossible distances. He could tell when the neighbors were grilling before they'd even started the barbecue. His hearing sharpened too. He'd flinch at sounds I couldn't detect. Television volumes that used to be comfortable now made him wince. He started wearing noise-canceling headphones constantly, even at dinner. His eyes changed subtly, the pupils seeming larger than normal, reflecting light in the dark like an animal's. I noticed it one night when I checked on him while he slept. The light from the hallway hit his face and his eyes flashed green for just a second. When I mentioned it to Dr. Tanaka, she added ophthalmology to the list of specialists we needed to see. The aggression became harder to manage. Liam got into a fight at school, his first ever, after another student made a joke about his eating habits. According to the principal, Liam had thrown the other boy against a locker hard enough to dent the metal, then stood over him with his fists clenched, breathing hard. The school resource officer had to physically pull Liam away. When I picked him up from the principal's office, his hands were still shaking with adrenaline. He kept apologizing, saying he didn't know what happened, that something just snapped inside him. The other boy was fine, just scared, and his parents decided not to press charges after I explained Liam was dealing with medical issues. But the school put him on suspension for a week, and the principal suggested maybe a transfer to alternative education would be better for everyone. I argued against it, fighting for my son's right to stay in his school, but I could see the fear in the principal's eyes. They thought Liam was dangerous. Maybe he was. At home, I started noticing physical changes too. His jaw seemed wider, more pronounced. His teeth looked sharper, especially the canines, which had elongated slightly. When I mentioned this to Dr. Tanaka, she examined his mouth carefully and confirmed the dental changes were real. His teeth were actually restructuring, the enamel thickening and the points becoming more defined. It was like his body was adapting to his new diet, optimizing itself for consuming raw meat. She documented everything with photographs and measurements, her scientific fascination barely concealed behind professional concern. She said evolution didn't work this fast, that genetic mutations didn't express themselves this dramatically, in just months. Whatever was happening to Liam defied current understanding of human biology. She started calling it acute onset carnivorous adaptation syndrome in her notes, a name she made up because nothing else fit. The university's ethics board approved a case study, and suddenly, Liam became medical history. The media attention started when someone leaked his case to a local news blog. Suddenly, reporters were calling, wanting interviews, asking invasive questions about my cannibal son. The headline made me sick. Local teen develops taste for raw flesh, doctors baffled. The article was full of speculation and fear-mongering, comparing Liam to fictional monsters. His classmates saw it. The harassment at school intensified until I had no choice but to withdraw him entirely. We started homeschooling, just the two of us in our house that felt smaller every day. Liam barely spoke anymore. He spent hours in front of his computer researching his condition, reading medical journals way above his grade level, trying to understand what his body was becoming. Late one night, I found him crying at his desk, surrounded by printouts of articles about genetic mutations and evolutionary adaptation. He looked up at me with eyes that held too much knowledge for 15 and asked if he was still human. I didn't have an answer. Dr. Baiss. Tanaka arranged for us to meet with Dr. Lawrence Chen, a leading geneticist from Stanford, who happened to be visiting the university. Wait, I need to use a different name. Dr. Lawrence Bennett, a leading geneticist who specialized in spontaneous mutations. He examined Liam with the detached curiosity of a scientist encountering a unique specimen. His questions were clinical, probing. How often did the cravings occur? What percentage of his diet was raw meat now? Had he experienced any urges toward non-food sources of protein? That last question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I answered before Liam could, saying no, absolutely not. My son wasn't dangerous. But Dr. Bennett's eyes said he wasn't so sure. He took tissue samples and more blood, promising results within a week. As we left his office, I heard him on the phone already, talking excitedly about unprecedented genetic plasticity and potential breakthrough in understanding human adaptation. The nightmares started around this time. Liam would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, describing dreams where he was hunting through forests, chasing prey on four legs. The dreams felt real, he said, more like memories than imagination. Dr. Okoye, the therapist, suggested this was his subconscious processing the physical changes, creating narratives to make sense of his new instincts. But Liam insisted they were too vivid, too detailed. He could taste blood in his dreams, feel the satisfaction of a successful kill. The line between his waking and sleeping life was blurring. One night I found him sleepwalking, standing in the backyard in his pajamas, staring at the woods behind our property line with an intensity that frightened me. When I guided him back to bed, he didn't wake up. In the morning, he had no memory of it, but the grass where he'd stood was torn up, like he'd been digging with his bare hands. The breakthrough came from Dr. Bennett's lab. He called late on a Wednesday night, his voice crackling with excitement. The genetic sequencing had revealed something extraordinary. Liam's DNA contained sequences that didn't match human genetic code. Not entirely. Small sections of his genome had somehow incorporated what looked like predator DNA, species that Dr. Bennett couldn't immediately identify, but that showed markers consistent with large carnivores. It was impossible, he kept saying, impossible but happening right in front of them. The mutation was ongoing, actively rewriting Liam's genetic code in real time. He'd never seen anything like it. He wanted to bring Liam to Stanford for more intensive study, maybe keep him in their research facility for a few months. I said no immediately. My son wasn't a lab rat. Dr. Bennett tried to convince me, talking about the advancement of science and how much they could learn, but I hung up on him. That night, Liam asked what the doctor had said, and I lied, told him they were still running tests. I couldn't tell him his DNA was becoming something other than human. The meat consumption reached new levels. Our grocery bills were astronomical. I was buying entire sides of beef from wholesale distributors, storing them in a chest freezer in the garage. Liam would go through 5 pounds of meat a day, sometimes more, eating it in his room, away from my eyes. The smell of his room changed, taking on a musky animal quality that no amount of air freshener could cover. I started finding bones in his trash can, completely stripped clean with marks that looked like they'd been gnawed. His teeth were definitely changing faster now. The canines were nearly twice their normal length, and when he smiled, which was rare, he looked predatory. Other teeth were shifting too, molars flattening to become better at tearing meat. His jaw popped when he ate, like the joint was restructuring itself to accommodate a wider range of motion. School became impossible to even consider. The homeschool curriculum I'd set up went mostly ignored. Liam couldn't concentrate on history or math when his body was screaming demands at him constantly. He'd try to sit through a lesson and within minutes he'd be fidgeting, his leg bouncing compulsively, his eyes tracking toward the kitchen where the freezer hummed with its supply of meat. I gave up on formal education and focused instead on just keeping him stable. Dr. Okoye suggested we accept the changes rather than fight them, help Liam build a new identity around what he was becoming instead of mourning who he used to be. Easy for him to say. He wasn't watching his child transform into something unknown. But maybe he was right. Maybe acceptance was the only path forward. That night at dinner, I asked Liam what he needed from me. Not what doctors wanted or what society expected, but what he actually needed. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "I need you to not be afraid of me," he said, "even when I'm afraid of myself." The incident that changed everything happened on a Saturday night. I'd gone to bed around 11, exhausted from another day of phone calls with insurance companies who didn't want to cover experimental treatments. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to the sound of breaking glass downstairs. I grabbed the baseball bat from my closet and crept down the stairs, my heart hammering. The back door was open, glass from the window scattered across the kitchen floor, and Liam was gone. I ran outside in my bare feet, calling his name into the darkness. The backyard was empty. The woods behind our house were pitch black, impenetrable. I grabbed a flashlight and plunged into the trees, branches catching at my clothes, roots trying to trip me. I shouted for Liam until my voice went hoarse, but only silence answered back. 2 hours I searched those woods, terror making my hands numb and my chest tight. Finally, around 4:30, I found him. He was in a clearing about half a mile from the house, crouched over the carcass of a deer. The flashlight beam caught him mid-bite, his face buried in the animal's exposed flesh, his hands covered in blood up to his elbows. For a moment I thought I'd found a stranger, some wild thing that had nothing to do with my son. Then he looked up, and I saw Liam's eyes staring out from that blood-smeared face, and they were full of shame so profound it made my heart crack. He'd killed the deer with his bare hands. I could see the claw marks on its throat, except Liam didn't have claws. But when I looked at his hands in the flashlight beam, his fingernails were longer, thicker, curved like talons. He started crying, these awful, keening sobs, and tried to apologize through mouthfuls of raw venison. I knelt down beside him in the dirt and leaves, ignoring the blood and the smell, and pulled him against my chest. He was still my son. He was still Liam, even like this. I held him while he cried himself out, and when he finally calmed down, we sat in that clearing as dawn broke through the trees. We cleaned up the deer together, though I had no idea what we were going to do with it. Liam was moving differently now, his body more fluid, each movement precise and economical like a predator's. We carried the carcass back to the house wrapped in an old tarp, and I helped him butcher it in the garage using tools I'd never imagined using for this purpose. He showed me how to section the meat, his hand steady and confident, like he'd been doing this his whole life. We worked in silence, and there was something almost meditative about it. When we finished, we had enough meat to fill the chest freezer completely. Liam thanked me quietly, his voice hoarse from crying earlier. I realized this was a turning point. I could reject what he was becoming, cling to the hope that medicine would fix him, or I could meet him where he was. I chose my son. I would always choose my son. Dr. Tanaka wasn't happy when I told her we were stopping all treatments and tests. She argued that we were on the verge of understanding Liam's condition, that withdrawing now would set back research potentially decades. I told her we didn't care about research. We cared about Liam living his life, whatever form that life took. She threatened to report us to Child Protective Services, claiming I was medically neglecting my son. I reminded her that Liam was thriving physically, that all his vital signs were strong, that he wasn't in pain or danger. The mutation wasn't killing him, it was changing him, and maybe that wasn't something that needed to be cured. She eventually backed down, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. She made me promise to call if anything changed dramatically. I promised, knowing I probably wouldn't. We were done being specimens. Life settled into a new rhythm over the following months. Liam hunted in the woods behind our house 3 or 4 nights a week, always bringing back his kills to process and store. His senses were so acute now that tracking prey was almost effortless for him. He moved through the forest like he'd lived there his whole life, silent and sure-footed. His body had finished most of its transformation. He was taller now, his frame packed with lean muscle that hadn't been there before. His face had changed subtly, the bone structure sharper, more angular. His eyes caught light in the dark, that green flash I'd first noticed months ago now permanent and unmistakable. His teeth were fully adapted, a predator's dentition that he kept hidden behind closed lips when we had visitors, which was rare. Most people had stopped coming around. The rumors about what happened to Liam had spread through our small town, mutating into wild stories about cannibalism and demonic possession. We let them talk. Their fear kept us isolated, and isolation kept Liam safe. His mental state stabilized once we stopped fighting the changes. The aggression faded when he wasn't constantly hungry and frustrated. He started reading again, devouring books about animal behavior and evolutionary biology, trying to understand himself through scientific lens. He taught himself about apex predators, their hunting strategies, their role in ecosystems. He saw himself in those pages, found identity in the wolves and big cats that lived by instinct and necessity. Dr. Okoye, who I'd kept seeing for my own mental health, said Liam was remarkably well-adjusted considering everything. He'd found a way to integrate his new nature with his human consciousness, creating something unique, not quite human anymore, but not entirely other either. Something in between, something new. The therapist asked if I was afraid of my son. I told him honestly that sometimes, late at night, when I heard Liam moving through the house with his new grace and power, there was a flutter of primal fear in my chest, but it passed quickly, replaced by love and acceptance. He was still my boy. The question of his future haunted me, though. He couldn't go back to regular school. College seemed impossible. What kind of life could he have, living in the margins between human and predator? One evening I found him on the back porch, staring at the woods with that faraway look he got sometimes. I sat beside him and asked what he was thinking about. He said he'd been researching rural properties out west, places with lots of land and few neighbors. He wanted to know if we could move somewhere he could live more freely, hunt, without worrying about being seen. The question caught me off guard. Moving meant leaving my job, our home, everything familiar. But it also meant giving Liam a real chance at a life that fit who he'd become. I told him we'd figure it out together. His smile, predatory teeth and all, was the most genuine expression of happiness I'd seen from him in months. We put the house on the market that spring and started looking at properties in Montana and Wyoming, places with hundreds of acres, far from civilization, where Liam could run and hunt without human interference. My sister Vanessa thought I was crazy, enabling Liam's condition instead of fighting harder for treatment. She stopped calling after I told her to respect our choices or stay out of our lives. It hurt losing her support, but I couldn't explain in a way she'd understand. She hadn't watched her child transform, hadn't seen the peace in Liam's eyes when he finally stopped fighting what he was becoming. We found a property in western Montana, 200 acres backing up to national forest land, a small cabin that needed work but had good bones. The isolation was perfect. We bought it with money from selling our house and from a settlement with the university after I threatened to sue them for how they'd handled Liam's medical privacy. Dr. Tanaka had leaked details to colleagues who leaked to press. The damage to our reputation was permanent, but at least we got compensation. The move happened in late summer. Packing up our old life felt like closing a chapter I'd never expected to finish this way. Liam helped load the truck, his enhanced strength making him capable of lifting furniture I'd have needed help with. The neighbors watched us go with visible relief. Good riddance to the freak family, their expressions said. I didn't care anymore what they thought. We drove across the country with the windows down, and I watched Liam's face as we left the suburbs behind and entered real wilderness. His whole body relaxed in ways I hadn't seen since before the changes started. This was what he needed. Space, freedom, acceptance. The cabin was rustic, no internet and spotty cell service, but it had electricity and running water. We spent the first week making it livable, repairing the roof and clearing brush from around the property. Liam worked tirelessly, his body seemingly immune to fatigue. At night, he'd disappear into the forest for hours, returning before dawn with stories of elk herds and mountain lions he'd observed from a distance. Life in Montana was different in ways both difficult and wonderful. I worked remotely when I could get internet at the library in town 20 miles away, picking up freelance accounting jobs that paid less than my old position, but kept us afloat. Liam thrived. He hunted almost every night, his territory expanding as he learned the landscape. He brought back meat we'd processed together, filling 2 chest freezers we'd bought. What we couldn't use, we buried deep in the forest, returning nutrients to the soil. It was a sustainable cycle, Liam as part of the ecosystem rather than separate from it. His humanity hadn't disappeared, just evolved. He still read voraciously, still helped with chores around the cabin, still had the same dry sense of humor. But he moved between human and predator states fluidly now, comfortable in both. Sometimes I'd watch him from the cabin window as he sat on the porch at dawn, his profile sharp against the rising sun, and I'd wonder what his mother would think of what he'd become. I like to believe she'd have loved him through it, same as I had. The Forest Service ranger who patrolled our area became a friend of sorts. His name was Douglas Riley, a man in his 60s who'd spent 40 years in these mountains. He stopped by one afternoon to introduce himself and make sure we knew the regulations about hunting and property boundaries. Liam was out on a run, his new preferred form of exercise, so it was just me. Douglas mentioned he'd been tracking an unusual predator in the area, something that was taking down deer and elk with unprecedented efficiency. The kills were clean, professional, nothing left to waste. He'd never seen anything like it. I stayed quiet, offering nothing. He looked at me for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful, then said, "Some things aren't meant to be explained, just accepted." After he left, I found a handwritten note tucked under a rock on our porch. "Your boy is safe here. This land doesn't judge." Douglas knew. Somehow he knew, and he was giving us his blessing. I kept that note in my wallet. A year after the move, Liam looked fully grown despite being only 16. The transformation had plateaued, his body settling into its final form. He was 6'3", all lean muscle and predatory grace, his face handsome in a sharp, dangerous way. His eyes still flashed in the dark, his teeth still marked him as something other, but he'd learned to navigate human spaces when necessary. We'd drive into town monthly for supplies, and he'd keep his head down, his movements deliberately human, disguising what he really was. People left us alone, probably sensing something off about him, even if they couldn't articulate what. We bought a truck that Liam learned to drive, giving him independence to explore further. He'd take weekend trips deeper into the mountains, sometimes gone for days, living fully as the predator he'd become. He always came back, though, drawn by the human part of himself that still needed connection, still needed his father. The question of whether there were others like him came up sometimes. Late-night conversations on the porch, where Liam would wonder if he was unique or if this was happening to other people too, hidden away in isolated places like ours. I had no answer. Dr. Tanaka's research had suggested the mutation was spontaneous, maybe triggered by environmental factors or dormant genes activated by puberty, but maybe she was wrong. Maybe there was a community of changed people living in the margins, unrecognized by mainstream science. Liam created an anonymous blog where he documented his experience, careful not to include identifying details. The response shocked us both. Messages from people describing similar experiences, unexplained appetites, and physical changes that defied medical explanation. Most were probably hoaxes or mentally ill, but some rang true. Liam started corresponding with a few, building a network of people who understood what it meant to be other. It gave him something I couldn't, peers who shared his reality. On his 17th birthday, we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Liam was quiet, contemplative in the way he got sometimes when he was processing something deep. Finally, he said, "Thank you for not giving up on me, for letting me become this." His voice was deeper now, rougher, but still fundamentally his. I told him there was never a question of giving up. He was my son, my only child, and I'd walk through fire for him. He nodded slowly, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you think I'm still human?" I considered my answer carefully. "I think humanity isn't about biology," I finally said. "It's about how you treat others, the choices you make, the love you give and receive. By that measure, you're more human than most people I know." He smiled, those sharp teeth catching the last light, and for a moment he looked exactly like the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap during story time. Some things, the important things, hadn't changed at all. 2 years after the transformation began, Liam was thriving in ways I'd stopped believing possible during those dark, early months. He'd found purpose in his new life, working remotely with wildlife conservation groups who appreciated his unique understanding of predator behavior. He consulted on mountain lion management and wolf reintroduction programs, his insights invaluable even if he couldn't explain their source. The money wasn't great, but it was meaningful work. He'd also started training in wilderness medicine, thinking he might become a backcountry medic, using his enhanced physical abilities to reach places others couldn't. His future, once so uncertain, was taking shape in ways that honored both his human intellect and his predator nature. I was proud of him in ways that went beyond typical parental pride. He'd survived something that could have destroyed him and emerged stronger, finding integration instead of fragmentation. Some nights, I still lay awake wondering what came next, if the changes would continue or if this was his final form. But mostly, I'd made peace with not knowing. We lived day by day, accepting what came, adapting as we'd learned to do. Liam had taught me that evolution wasn't always gradual or pretty, but it was survival, and survival was enough. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.